after the elections in September.
All right, thank you very much for your insight, Ashraf Mohammed Najib, joining us there live from Cairo and talking to us about the economic consequences of this crisis in Egypt, which is now in its 15th day, day 15 of anti-Mubarak demonstrations. And the crowd still very much determined and huge in Cairo and also in the second largest city, Alexandria, as we saw earlier. If you're just joining us here on Al Jazeera, it's now 1400 hours GMT, 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Egypt. That's seen in Cairo, Tahrir Square, ground zero for anti-Mubarak demonstrations in the past 15 days. And the crowd's incredibly enormous again today, Tuesday, in what's being called another million-man march. And it's not just in Tahrir Square. We've been hearing from our correspondents and from pro-democracy activists on the ground. There are also protests taking place outside the Parliament building, where 1,000 people are reported to have gathered, demanding also that Mubarak stands down. We've also heard of journalists protesting against their editor, who they view as being a crony to the regime. So the protests now, it seems, in Cairo expanding outside of Tahrir Square, and other protests also taking place in the second largest city, Alexandria. We'll hear from our correspondents on the ground throughout the next hour, of course. Let's just run you through some of the latest developments out of Cairo now this hour. Thousands of protesters, as you can see on those pictures there, continue to pour into Tahrir or Liberation Square. Our correspondent is telling us that many more are queuing up, trying to get into that area. A few hours ago, Vice President Omar Suleiman said there is a plan and timetable for a peaceful transfer of power. He's also told protesters there'll be no reprisals against them. Meanwhile, a group of lawyers have filed a petition against President Mubarak. They accuse him of stealing wealth from the state and want to have him indicted. Let's go live right now to Al Jazeera's Hoda Abdelhamid, who's overlooking Tahrir Square. Hoda, the crowds there just keep growing from what I can see.
It definitely keeps on growing, and I have to tell you that the queue I had described you earlier, well, that has become 3 thick queues that stretch all along the Kasr-el-Nil Bridge, all of people trying to come into Liberation Square. And now from any side you look at the square, from any of the streets that lead to the square, there are people pouring in. And I have to say that today's people are a mixture of those who have been coming here for the past 2 weeks, because today is the today starts the 3rd week of protest, actually. And there's also a whole new breed of people, first-timers. I saw a few people carrying the flag of the GASCO. That is the National Company for Gas. So civil servants, those who have received the 50% increase. I've also seen a banner saying the Lawyers Syndicate of Suez. I've seen also some teachers. So certainly, despite the increase, it seems that, you know, this message is actually resonating among people where the protesters were not sure they were reaching them.
It's certainly very interesting that you mentioned that, you know, people who've had an increase in salary are also taking to the streets. You wonder really what's motivating these people to come out.
Well, we were discussing that earlier, and it may very well be that it's been 2 weeks that the country was shut down and people were not at work. Yesterday, it was the first day. Most of the people returned to work. They got their salaries, and it may be that all this is sparking conversation among the Egyptian society. It is a first in the country, really. No one who's even 50 today has ever seen such a thing happening in the country. So it may be that people did discuss among themselves and decided to come and see for themselves, because the swelling of the crowds started around 1 p.m. local, and that is when these days government offices shut down.
Certainly very significant. I was going to ask you about the other demonstrations that are reportedly taking place outside of Tahrir Square, Hoda. We heard from a pro-democracy activist earlier who said that there were about 1,000 people outside of the Parliament building. There are journalists also protesting. We spoke to a university professor as well. How significant is it that the protests are now also taking part in other parts of Cairo, not just Liberation Square?
I think it is very significant. I do know that the protests I told you earlier of a march from Liberation Square to the TV building did not happen because the army did not allow that to happen. But just the mere fact that there are little protests scattered all around Cairo and indeed in the rest of the country, because we do have reports of that, is just very significant for the organizers of all this. I have to tell you, the morale was quite low. There was a lot of hesitation. There was a lot of fear that the momentum was being lost, that the window for democracy was being shut down again, that the government had managed to use all the institutions to get back on its heels. And I think now, with what they're seeing today, it's going to give them certainly a boost of energy. One of the organizers told me she had been here for the past 15 days, sleeping in Liberation Square for 15 days. She was planning to go home tonight to have a shower and a good night's sleep, and she said today that after what she's seen, she's not going to leave the place.
So the morale certainly very high in Tahrir Square, people very much determined still. Hoda Abdelhamid, thank you very much for the time being. Now, in the meantime, the government keeps making concessions. In a statement made on state TV, the country's vice president said that a plan was in place for the peaceful transfer of power. Omar Suleiman also stressed that demonstrators will not be prosecuted.
Today, the President signed a presidential decree for the formation of the Constitutional Committee to carry out necessary amendments to the Constitution and the parallel legislative amendments. He also instructed the Prime Minister to form the steering committee to follow up with the precise implementation of the agreements reached by the parties to the national dialogue, and a third fact-finding committee on the incidents and clashes of Wednesday last, and to refer the outcomes to the Chief Prosecutor to take necessary actions.
Let's speak now to Shireen Tadros, overlooking Tahrir Square, also one of our other correspondents there on the ground. Shireen, I want to talk politics a bit. The government making more concessions, and clearly it's falling on deaf ears.
Well, essentially, I think what Omar Suleiman is offering the protesters is a process, and what the protesters want to see is results. And they're not buying this argument that the government is trying to sell, that what they need is more time to achieve the demands that the protesters are making. They're saying that these constitutional amendments in the past have been made in days. Why is it that now the government is asking for months to enact them, and starting this whole big process of a committee? So, you know, they're even looking at the statements by Hosni Mubarak, the latest statements, where he talked about amending the constitution insofar as limiting the term of the president. So they're saying if these amendments can be made, then why aren't they being made faster? And that is essentially why these people are here, because they still don't believe that these processes are really going to lead to anything until Mubarak goes. And these amendments are made by the people, they are discussed by the people, and they are then subject to a referendum from the people and not to a presidential decree.
It's certainly interesting to note, Shireen, that the Vice President, Omar Suleiman, is playing an increasingly powerful role. I may be wrong, but he's the one talking on TV, he's the one making all these announcements about concessions and so on. What do you think their strategy is here? What are they trying to show?
Yeah, there's certainly an effort. In the first few days, even week, we saw President Mubarak really take the reins. He was the one that was speaking sporadically, as it was, on television, trying to calm things down. That wasn't working, and it does seem that they've understood the idea that the president really can't make people here leave. What he needs to do is stand a little bit in the back while Omar Suleiman talks to the people. Omar Suleiman may not be widely followed, if you like, but he certainly has credibility and respect amongst the people. Now, if he continues in this way to say things that the protesters simply don't believe in, then he'll end up in the same boat as Hosni Mubarak in terms of people here not believing what he's trying to tell them. So it's a difficult position for the vice president right now, but there is a rumor, if you like, that was circulating, an idea that President Mubarak will more and more try and fade into the background, that perhaps perhaps even he will go to Germany, where he's been receiving treatment in the past. He'll stay in Germany, and slowly there'll be a transition of power. That won't be good enough for people here, because as long as President Mubarak stays in power, they know that at any point he could come back and start making decrees. He could limit the kind of constitutional reform that the people are asking for. It's only by Mubarak leaving and then the process that will then take form in terms of a transition of power to perhaps a parliamentary speaker or to the vice president, that will indicate change for these people. Anything less is just cosmetic.
You've been in Cairo almost 3 weeks now, Shireen. Is there, in your opinion, any cause for optimism for the protesters in Tahrir that Mubarak